Hello, friends, and welcome to a fantastic science fiction story. In this episode, I'll tell you the tale of Cooper, a human mechanic, and Ellie, an alien woman. If you're ready to listen to this amazing story, let's begin. Enjoy. I sent the wrong signal, and an alien woman beamed into my repair shop. The transmitter had been sitting on Cooper's back bench for 11 days, sulking. That was the only word for it. It was an old military surplus unit, the kind with more toggle switches than sense, and its owner, a retired man named Robert who collected radios the way other people collected regrets, had brought it in, insisting it was haunted. Cooper did not believe in haunted radios. He believed in corroded solder joints, cheap capacitors, and customers who dropped things and then blamed the supernatural. So far, the evidence was firmly on the side of corroded solder joints, but the radio kept doing this thing where it went dead the instant Cooper looked pleased with himself, which he had to admit was at least a little theatrical. It was closing on 9 at night. The shop had that end-of-day smell it always got, solder smoke and machine oil and the ghost of the microwave burrito he'd had for dinner and immediately regretted. The overhead fluorescents buzzed in the key of a headache. Around him, the whole cluttered kingdom of his repair shop slumped in comfortable disarray, shelves sagging with orphaned appliances, a wall of labeled coffee cans that held everything except coffee, a dead toaster he kept meaning to fix and never would because it had become, over the years, more of a friend than a project. Cooper wiped his hands on a rag that made them dirtier and leaned in over the transmitter one more time. "All right," he told it, because he talked to machines, which was less embarrassing than admitting he talked to himself. "One more frequency and then you and I are getting a divorce." The manual, water-stained and older than he was, listed a calibration range in the back. He'd been walking the dial up through it all evening, watching the needle, chasing the whisper of a carrier wave. He reached for the tuning knob, squinted at a number smudged half to death by some previous owner's thumb, and fed it in. The smudge, in hindsight, was important. What he read as a 3 had, in a fairer world, been an 8. He dialed to the 8 that was a 3, or the 3 that should have been an 8, thumbed the transmit key, and settled back on his stool to wait for the usual disappointing hiss. He got, instead, the sun. That was how it felt, like someone had reached into the shop and switched on the sun. The fluorescents didn't just flicker, they shrieked, a rising electric wail that climbed straight past hearing into the fillings of his teeth. Every needle on every dead gauge in the room slammed to its peg at once. Cooper's stool went out from under him in his scramble backward, and he hit the concrete tailbone first with a sound and a word he'd have been embarrassed for Robert to hear. White light poured out of the middle of the air itself, folding, curdling, taking on weight and edges, and Cooper had the distinct and unwelcome thought that he was about to die in his own shop over a haunted radio, and Robert was going to feel absolutely vindicated. Then the light collapsed inward, the wail cut to silence, and the fluorescents dropped back to their ordinary buzz, as if nothing had happened. Something had happened. There was a woman standing between his workbench and the shelf of dead toasters. Cooper stayed exactly where he was on the floor, one hand still braced behind him, and simply looked. She was tall and green, not sickly green, not comic book green, but a deep, living green, like the underside of a leaf held up to light, and she stood with the unmistakable poise of someone who had been in the middle of doing something important and dignified right up until this exact instant. She wore clothing that fit too well and shimmered slightly wrong. Her hair was dark and swept back, and her ears, Cooper's brain snagged on the ears. Her ears rose to long, tapering points, swept up and back like something out of a story he'd been told before he was old enough to be skeptical. She was looking around the shop. She was looking at the sagging shelves, and the coffee cans, and the microwave burrito wrapper, and the dead toaster, and then down at Cooper on the floor with his rag and his gaping mouth, and every single thing about her expression said that this was not, under any circumstances, where she had expected to be. For a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Somewhere in the guts of the transmitter, a single capacitor gave a small, apologetic tick as it cooled. A wrench Cooper had left balanced on the edge of the bench chose that moment to lose its nerve. It slid, teetered, and dropped, clanging off the concrete with a bright, ridiculous racket that seemed to go on for about a year. The sound seemed to unstick him. Cooper opened his mouth, ran through several openings in his head. "Who are you? How did you please don't vaporize me? Discarded all of them," and heard himself say, in the small, strangled voice of a man whose entire understanding of reality had just been recalibrated along with his transmitter. The shops actually closed." She blinked at him. Slowly, one elegant tapered ear twitched, as though it, too, could not quite believe what it had just heard. For a while, the woman didn't answer him, which Cooper found he could live with, because he wasn't entirely sure he'd meant to speak in the first place. She was still turning, taking slow inventory of the room, and the more of it she saw, the more her expression tightened, the way a person's face tightens when the punchline of a joke keeps failing to arrive. Finally, she settled her attention back on him. Still on the floor, still clutching his filthy rag like a talisman, and drew herself up to a height that made the low ceiling of the shop feel apologetic. "You," she said. Her voice was low and clear and carried the faint burr of an accent Cooper's ear couldn't place on any map. "You are the one who called. I'm the one who— No, I didn't call anybody." Cooper got a hand under himself and levered upright, wincing at his tailbone, keeping the workbench solidly between them out of a caution he couldn't have justified. "I don't even have a landline anymore. I was fixing a radio." Something happened in her face then. A flicker of pure disbelief so complete it was almost funny, except that Cooper was too busy being terrified to laugh. "You were," she repeated, "fixing a radio." "It's a transmitter, technically. Robert's. He thinks it's haunted." He gestured weakly at the sulking gray box on the bench, and then wished he hadn't, because it drew her gaze to it, and the way she looked at that battered military surplus unit was not the way a person looks at a broken appliance. It was the way a person looks at a grave that has come open. She crossed to it in 2 steps, and Cooper flinched, but she didn't touch it. She only stood over it, one hand hovering above the casing, and when she spoke again, the sharpness had gone out of her and left something quieter and much worse underneath. "This carried the signal," she said. "This little thing. This is what pulled me across." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "Do you have any idea what you have done? Honestly? Not even a little." Cooper heard his own voice climb and forced it back down. "But I'm getting the sense it's not a warranty issue." She turned to face him fully, and he made himself hold still under the weight of it. "My name is Ellie," she said, as though the name cost her something. "My people seeded the dark between the stars with a call, a very long time ago. A beacon. It was to be woken only in the direst need, famine of a world, the failing of a sun, the kind of ending that leaves no other door. When it woke, one of us would answer. That was the promise. That was the whole of the promise." She let the silence sit. "It has slept, unanswered, for more generations than you have years in your little life. Most of my kind believe it dead. Some believe it was never real. I trained to answer it the way your people, I imagine, train to fight fires they pray never to see." Her eyes went to the transmitter, then to the burrito wrapper, then to him. "I answered, and I find famine of a world. I find the sun failing." A beat. "I find you, and a radio." Cooper opened his mouth, closed it. He was aware, distantly, that a wiser man would be on his knees begging forgiveness, but the part of his brain that ran his mouth had never once consulted the wiser part, and it wasn't about to start now. "In my defense," he said, "the 8 looked like a 3. Ellie stared at him. "The frequency," he pressed on, because stopping now felt more dangerous than continuing. "In the manual, some previous owner smudged there was a thumbprint right over the number, and I read it as a 3, but I think it was maybe an 8, and I've been going up the dial all night and—" He ran out of thread. "I thought I was going to get static. I always get static. I'd have bet the shop on static." For one terrible second he was certain she was going to do something to him that his insurance did not cover. Her whole frame was drawn taut with the effort of holding on to her fury, holding it the way you hold water in cupped hands, and he watched it start, helplessly, to run out between her fingers, because there was nothing here to be furious at. There was no catastrophe to answer, no enemy, no ending. There was a smudged thumbprint, and a man who talked to toasters, and a shop that smelled of solder and regret. And the sheer cosmic stupidity of it all was too large to stay angry inside of. "A thumbprint," she said faintly. "A thumbprint," Cooper agreed. Ellie sat down. She did it without quite deciding to, folding onto the customer stool by the counter, and she pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose in a gesture so profoundly, universally weary that Cooper felt an unexpected pang of kinship with something from the far side of the galaxy. "You realize," she said, muffled behind her hand, "that I do not know how to go back." "Yeah." He set the rag down. Outside, the town was dark and ordinary and had absolutely no idea. "Yeah, I was starting to worry we were both in that boat." They agreed, without ever formally agreeing that panic could wait until morning. There was a peculiar relief in it, the shared understanding that neither of them was going to solve interstellar transit before breakfast, and that they might as well be uncomfortable together rather than separately. Cooper offered her the good chair, which was the one with all 4 wheels, and then remembered it was also the only chair, at which point he offered her the other stool, which wobbled, and then apologized for the stool, and Ellie watched this entire negotiation unfold with the expression of a scientist observing a particularly anxious animal in its habitat. "Sit down," she said finally. "Please, before you offer me the floor." He sat. So did she, on the wobbling stool, which she steadied against the counter with an unconscious grace that made Cooper's own relationship with furniture look like an ongoing feud. For a while, they just occupied the same lit square of the shop, 2 people from opposite ends of everything, listening to the fluorescents buzz. Then Ellie began quietly to prowl. She couldn't seem to help it. She rose and drifted along his shelves, and Cooper found himself narrating like the world's least prepared tour guide because silence with her felt more dangerous than talking. "That's a toaster. Dead. That's another toaster, also dead, don't ask. Coffee cans. Those don't have coffee. They've got resistors, washers, fuses, the little screws that fall out of everything and refuse to say where they came from." She lifted the lid of one and studied the glittering hoard of hardware inside with the reverence of an archaeologist. "Your civilization," she murmured, "keeps its treasure in vessels labeled for a beverage." When you say it like that, it sounds smarter than it is. He fed coins into the vending machine in the corner. It dispensed exactly 4 things, all of them terrible, and pressed something into her hands. A crackling foil packet of orange crackers the color of a hazard sign. She turned it over, sniffed it, opened it with the caution of a bomb technician, and ate 1 cracker. Her ears, Cooper noticed, did a small involuntary thing when the artificial cheese hit. A startled flick, quickly mastered. "This is not food," she said, and had another. "What is this?" "Nobody knows. That's what makes them special." He nudged the space heater with his foot until it grumbled to orange life. "Careful, it only heats the left half of whoever's in front of it. Ancient design flaw. I've made my peace with being warm on one side. And somewhere in there, between the crackers and the heater and the coffee cans, the nervousness started leaking out of the room. His joke stopped being the frantic kind and became the ordinary kind, and Ellie, to his surprise, gave as good as she got, dry as bone, landing small, precise observations about human absurdity that took him a second each to feel. When he told her the shop had been his father's, and then his, and that he'd told himself for years he was keeping it running out of duty, she looked at him a beat too long. "But," she said, "but it's easier to fix things than people," Cooper admitted, and was surprised to hear it out loud. "In here, nothing wants to talk about its feelings. A capacitor's either good or it's blown. There's a comfort in that. World gets loud, I come back here and I make dead things work again, and nobody expects me to be more than that." He shrugged, embarrassed. "It's a hiding place with a cash register. What about you?" You got a home you're this desperate to get back to? Ellie was quiet. I have a home I love, she said at last, and a home I have never once been allowed to simply live in. My people are bound by the old promises, the beacon, the watch, the long patience. We are very good at duty and very poor at rest. I trained my whole life to answer a call that everyone assumed would never come, which meant I trained my whole life for nothing, and was told this was an honor. Her mouth twitched, and then a man read an 8 as a 3. So really, Cooper said, I gave you the night off. Her laugh escaped before she could stop it, low and startled, and she looked almost as surprised by it as he was. After that, the work started, though it hardly felt like work. They bent together over the transmitter, Cooper narrating its guts, Ellie following with an intelligence that ran a mile ahead of him, and slowly a shared picture assembled itself out of his human wiring and her half-remembered lore. She could read the shape of the ancient signal the way he read a schematic. He could trace where that signal had married itself into Robert's corroded old circuitry. It was, in its way, the best conversation he'd had in years, if you didn't mind that half of it concerned technology that predated his species. Then Ellie went very still, one finger resting on a lead she'd traced back to the antenna array. Cooper, she said, this did not stop. What do you mean, stop? It sent the signal, you showed up, the light show ended. The arrival ended. She looked up, and the ease had drained out of her face, leaving something careful in its place. The call did not. It is still speaking, quietly, beneath everything, a door you have propped open and cannot see. Her finger stayed on the wire, and I am not certain if we close it wrong that we would like what comes to shut it. They didn't sleep. It seemed absurd, later, that Cooper had ever imagined they might, that he genuinely floated the idea of sorting this out after breakfast, as though the universe kept business hours. Ellie spent the small hours with her hands half inside Robert's transmitter, and her mind clearly somewhere much further off, chasing the thread of the still whispering signal back along a route only she could follow, and Cooper made coffee that nobody drank and hovered, useless and unwilling to leave her to it. Talk to me, he said, when the not knowing got worse than any answer could be. You've had the face of someone doing math they don't like for an hour. What's the door propped open onto? Ellie sat back. In the orange light of the space heater, the green of her skin had gone to something deeper, and the tapered points of her ears caught small shadows. I told you the beacon was to be woken only in the direst need, she said. I did not tell you all of it, because I did not want to frighten you, and because a part of me hoped I was wrong. She set down the probe. A promise is only as strong as what enforces it. My people did not simply leave a call out in the dark and trust that someone would answer. They left a thing to make certain someone did. A watcher, a protocol, very old, older than the language we now speak, that listens for the beacon to wake, and when it does, moves to resolve the emergency that woke it. Resolve, Cooper repeated. He didn't like the way she'd said it, the small hitch before the word, the way she'd handled it like something with a sharp edge. That sounds like a nice word doing a lot of work. It was built in a harder age than mine, by people who had watched worlds die for want of help arriving too late. They decided that a false alarm was a luxury no one could afford. So the watcher does not ask whether the emergency is real. It cannot. It was made not to be able to. It hears the call. It confirms the call is still sounding, which yours is, beneath everything, because your radio has not stopped. And it treats that as proof. Proof that somewhere a world is ending and needs to be, in their word, resolved. She met his eyes. It is coming to help. And the help it was built to give was never gentle, because gentleness was not what a dying world was thought to need. Cooper was quiet for a moment. So let me make sure I've got this, he said. A very old, very literal-minded alien machine heard my transmitter cry wolf, and it's on its way to save a catastrophe that doesn't exist, and it is not the type to knock first and check. That is the shape of it, yes. And silence won't work. We can't just pull the plug, unplug Robert's radio, let it go quiet. No. Her voice sharpened. That is the cruelest part of the design. To the watcher, silence does not mean never mind. Silence means the caller has been overwhelmed. Silence means the emergency won, that whoever cried out has stopped crying out because there is no one left to cry. If we simply cut the signal now, the watcher will read it as a world that has gone dark, and it will not slow down. It will hasten. She almost smiled, and it was not a happy thing. My ancestors thought of everything except the possibility of an idiot with a smudged manual. Forgive me. I do not mean... No, you're right. That's fair. I earned that one. He dragged both hands down his face. How long? I do not know precisely. The watcher crosses distances that make your radio's little reach look like a whisper across a table. But it is not instantaneous, even for it. Hours. Perhaps a day. Not more. She looked at the transmitter, and then, with a directness that caught him off guard, at him. I am sorry, Cooper. You wished to fix a radio. Instead, you have summoned the least forgiving safety feature in the history of my people, and I have no way home. And now I must ask you to help me stop a thing I only half understand, in a workshop that smells of solder, with a day at most to do it. And here was the strange part, the part Cooper turned over afterward, and never fully explained to himself. He wasn't more frightened than he'd been an hour ago. If anything, the fear had settled into something usable, because a problem with a deadline was still, at the bottom of it, a problem. And problems were the one thing in the universe he trusted himself with. He looked at the woman who had fallen into his shop out of a smear of light and an honest mistake, and he found that at some point in the long night the thought of her going home had stopped being purely a relief. Okay, he said, and rolled his sleeves up further, which accomplished nothing but felt correct. Then we don't cut it, and we don't leave it screaming. We tell it something else. We give the watcher a different answer. He pulled the stool up beside hers, close, and reached for the manual with its ruinous, world-changing thumbprint. You said it listens for the call, so what happens if the call says thanks? We're fine. False alarm. Go home. Ellie went very still. Then, slowly, she looked at him as though seeing the shape of something. That, she said, has never once been tried, because no one has ever been foolish enough to wake it by accident and stubborn enough to try to talk it back down. A breath. It might work. It might make everything catastrophically worse. Great, said Cooper. My two favorite outcomes. Let's build it. The plan, stripped of its terror, was almost insulting in its simplicity, which Cooper had learned over a lifetime of repair work, was true of most plans right up until you tried to execute one. They would not silence the beacon, and they would not let it keep screaming. They would teach it to say something new, a countersignal threaded into the same ancient call, a message the watcher would accept as authentic because it rode in on the very frequency it had been built to trust. Call answered. All well. Stand down. The trouble, as ever, lived in the details, and the details were roughly 40,000 years old and written in a language Ellie could only partly remember. I know the shape of the affirmation, she said, sketching symbols in the dust of the bench with one finger, erasing them, sketching again. The stand down was sung, not spoken, a sequence, a cadence. My grandmother's grandmother would have known it whole. I have fragments, enough to begin, not enough to be sure. Fragments I can work with. Fragments are just a schematic with the coffee spilled on it. Cooper was already elbow-deep in Robert's transmitter, rerouting, splicing, coaxing the corroded old unit into becoming an instrument it was never designed to be. You give me the tune, I'll build the throat that sings it. What followed was the strangest 3 hours of his life, and Cooper had once spent a summer rewiring a funeral home. They worked shoulder to shoulder in the ruined lamplight, Ellie humming half-remembered cadences that raised the hair on his arms while he translated them into pulses and frequencies, feeding them into the machine, checking, correcting. The shop filled with a low harmonic hum that made the coffee cans buzz on their shelves and the dead toaster's element glow faintly, uselessly, as though it wanted to help. Twice they thought they had it. Twice they were wrong. The first time they were wrong, The signal inverted somewhere in the splice and, instead of all well, broadcast something Ellie translated, after a horrified pause, as roughly the situation has become significantly worse. Cooper killed the transmit key so fast he barked his knuckles on the casing. "Okay," he said, sucking his hand. "So that one told the killer robot to bring friends." Noted. Moving on. The second time they were wrong. A feedback loop built in the antenna array, and every light in the shop surged to a blinding white before Ellie, without hesitation, reached past him and yanked a lead he'd have sworn was load-bearing, dropping the whole thing to darkness and a smell of scorched insulation. They stood there, panting in the dark, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, and Cooper said into the ringing quiet, "You just guessed on that." "I did not guess," said Ellie with immense dignity. "I trusted." "Trusted what?" "You. Your hands. I watched them for an hour. They do not make mistakes the way the rest of you does." A pause. It was a compliment. "Take it before I reconsider." He took it. He fumbled the lights back up, and they went again. The third time, everything in Cooper wanted to hesitate, because the third time was the last time. The watcher was close now. Ellie could feel it the way you feel a train through the soles of your feet before you hear it, a pressure behind the sky. They had one throat, one song, one chance to sing it before the thing arrived and made its own decision about what resolving the shop would look like. Cooper's finger hovered over the transmit key. Every instinct he owned, every hard-won caution of a man who had learned to distrust the moment a plan looked finished, screamed at him to check it one more time. Ellie put her hand over his, not to press it down, just there, steadying. "It is ready," she said quietly. "I know the song now. You built it right." Her ears were angled forward, alert, listening to something on the far edge of hearing. "Send it, Cooper. Send it before I lose my nerve, because I have exactly this much and no more." He sent it. The hum rose, gathered, and poured out of the battered old transmitter in a clean ascending line. The stand-down, whole at last, an ancient affirmation carried on a frequency, read off a smudged thumbprint by a man fixing a radio. For a long, unbearable moment, nothing happened, and the pressure behind the sky went taut as a held breath, and Cooper became certain in his bones that they had gotten it wrong a third time and would not get to be wrong a fourth. Then the pressure broke. It didn't crash. It simply let go, unclenched, the way a fist becomes a hand. The hum in the transmitter softened, sweetened, and settled into something Ellie's whole body relaxed at the sound of the watcher, 40,000 years patient, hearing at last the one thing it had been built never to hear and always to hope for. Call answered. All well. Somewhere impossibly far off, an old and terrible machine received permission to turn around, and took it. The lights steadied. The coffee cans went quiet. The transmitter gave a small, contented tick. Ellie was still holding his hand. Neither of them mentioned it. Outside, the first gray of morning was coming up ordinary over an ordinary town that would never know how close it had come, and between them, humming faintly, sat an open door that Cooper now understood led all the way home. Morning came all the way up while they sat there, not talking, and the shop filled with the thin gold light of an ordinary day. The transmitter hummed low and steady on the bench, and Cooper understood that the hum was the sound of a door standing open. The same door, only now it swung the other way. Ellie had traced it out for him in the last hour, patient as always. The stand-down had not just turned the watcher around. It had settled the beacon, brought it back under her hand, and a beacon under her hand could be tuned. Where it had pulled her here, it could send her back. She'd need an hour, maybe less, to shape the return. Then she would step into a smear of light, and the shop would smell of solder and be quiet, and Cooper would go back to fixing toasters that nobody needed fixed. He made coffee. This time somebody drank it. Ellie held the mug in both hands and studied it the way she'd studied everything in his little kingdom. And when she sipped it, her ears did the small, involuntary thing again, and she said, "This is also not food." and had more. "You could stay for another cup," Cooper said, and heard how thin the joke was, and let it stand anyway. Ellie set the mug down. She looked at him for a long moment, and there was none of the poise she'd landed with, none of the diplomat cataloging a strange embassy, just a woman in a cluttered shop deciding something. "I have thought about what I go back to," she said. "A home I love, that I have never been permitted to live in. A whole life spent training to answer a call, and the call came, and it was a mistake, and the mistake was the most alive I have felt in longer than I want to tell you." Her mouth twitched. "My people are very good at duty and very poor at rest. I have decided I would like to be poor at duty and very good at rest for once, and I do not think I can learn that on the far side of the galaxy among people who will want a full report." Cooper's heart did something complicated. "I want to be clear, I have exactly one chair." "I have made my peace with the stool," said Ellie, "and the heater that warms one half of a person. I am, it turns out, willing to be warm on one side." But she did it properly. That was the part Cooper never forgot. She would not simply vanish and leave her people to wonder. She sat at the transmitter one last time, and where they had sung "All Well" to the watcher, she now composed something longer and more careful, threaded into the old beacon and sent home. The keeper of the call was found, safe and well. The beacon was answered, and would sleep again. There was no emergency, and none should come looking. She closed the ancient door behind her deliberately, gently, so that no one would ever again trip it by accident. No smudged thumbprint would ever wake the watcher, because Ellie folded the frequency shut and let it go dark the right way, the way that meant at peace instead of overwhelmed. When it was done, the hum in the transmitter faded to an ordinary silence, and Robert's haunted radio was, at last, only a radio. "It works now," Cooper said, oddly moved, running a thumb over the casing. 11 days. Turns out it wasn't haunted. It just had the whole thing backwards." "So did you," said Ellie. He looked up. "You told me this was a hiding place with a cash register," she said. "A man who fixes dead things because dead things do not ask him to be more than he is." She reached out and, with one finger, set the fallen wrench back on the edge of the bench where it had started the whole affair. "You talked a 40,000-year-old killing machine down from ending a world it invented, with a broken radio and a thumbprint, in a single night. I watched your hands do it. Do not tell me again that you are only a man who mends toasters." Cooper opened his mouth to argue, out of pure lifelong habit, and found he had nothing to argue with. Something in him that had been coiled small and safe for a very long time let go the way the pressure behind the sky had let go, unclenched, became a hand instead of a fist. He'd spent years in here making dead things work again because it was easier than being seen. And the one time the universe had reached in and seen him anyway, mid-swear, on the floor, clutching a filthy rag, it had left behind the best thing that ever happened to him. "For the record," he said, "you never did send that full report." "No," Ellie agreed serenely, picking up her coffee. "They will assume the beacon malfunctioned. They will assume correctly. It malfunctioned in the most useful way anything has ever malfunctioned in the history of my people." She turned the orange cracker packet over in her free hand, considering it with real fondness now. "Of every signal in all the dark between the stars, Cooper, yours was the wrong one. I've been told. It was also," she said, and here she finally let the smile come all the way up, unguarded, luminous, the first fully unmastered thing he'd seen her do, the only right mistake either of us has ever made. Outside, the town woke up and had no idea. Inside, the heater grumbled to orange life and warmed one half of each of them, and the shop that had been so quiet for so long was, for the first time Cooper could remember, exactly full enough. He handed her the last of the coffee. She took it. Neither of them mentioned that her hand stayed over his on the mug, and neither of them moved it away. Cooper spent his whole life believing that the safest thing you can do is stay small, fix what's broken, ask for nothing, hide behind a workbench where no one expects you to be more than you are. And maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you've built a quiet little shop of your own, somewhere inside, and told yourself it was enough. But here's what the wrong signal taught him. The door you're most afraid will open is sometimes the only one that leads home. He didn't find her by being careful. He found her by making a mistake he was too honest to hide from and too stubborn to run from, and everything that mattered came pouring through the gap. So ask yourself, before you close the manual and put the wrench back on the shelf, how many of the best things in your life arrived on purpose? And how many of them were the right mistake, the wrong frequency, the smudged thumbprint? The moment you meant to do something small and accidentally cracked your whole world open instead. Ellie could have been furious at being pulled across the galaxy by an error. Instead, she looked at the error and decided to stay. Maybe the people who love us aren't the ones who arrive according to plan. Maybe they're the ones who show up in the middle of the mess. Take one look at all of it. The dead toasters, the burrito wrapper, the man on the floor clutching a filthy rag, and decide that's exactly where they'd like to be warm on one side. You're going to send a lot of signals into the dark this year. Most of them will come back as static, but every so often, one won't. And when the light floods in and something impossible is standing in the middle of your ordinary life, don't tell it the shop is closed. Answer it. The end. Another story has come to an end, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. In return for our effort, please like the story, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. See you in another science fiction universe. Take care, friends.